We are going to complete our classical fireplace mantle build. So if you've been following this thing from the beginning, I salute you because this has been a journey. Last video in this journey was installing our triglyphs on our frieze. So moving up the build, the next thing to do is our cornice. So the cornice, I didn't really go into a whole lot of detail on the bed mold and the corona, because if you followed, you know on the mantle shelf top, we went through this whole thing in depth and detail. And exactly what's happening on the shelf top is happening above the frieze. The cornice is just repeating. So like I mentioned, the last thing we left off with was installing these triglyphs on our frieze. And let's just do a quick refresh. So this whole thing that we're building up here is called an entablature. And how that breaks down is you have this molding, which is an architrave, frieze is this section, and then cornice up here, which is not complete. Our cornice, this section, that breaks down even further. We have this bed mold that's a supporting molding. Notice that shape right there. It's like showing strength and lifting it up. That's that profile there. And then we have our corona, which consists of a soffit underneath and a fascia. And then we have our Sima, what most people know as a crown molding. And we're using a pretty standard profile. And if you look at this profile, you'll notice that it has a cove at the bottom of it. In classical architecture, here's what happens. This Sima molding does not wrap around the front when building a pediment, which is what we're doing. So here's what happens. In the pediment, it's gonna rake up at 22.5 degrees, and it will split that bottom cove right there. This is what is called a split fillet. So what I need to do is I need to rip that molding off on the table saw, that cove profile at the bottom of this molding, and let it go across, run across the face. And the crown part of it will only connect on the side when it wraps back into the wall, and on the pediment when it goes up at 22.5 degrees. So I have all of my pieces now pre-assembled for the outside corners for this little cove profile, and I can just get them installed right on top of that fascia there. As long as I'm lined up where the primer meets that raw wood, that's exactly where it needs to be. At this point, as you can see, we have that little cove bottom profile of our crown installed around the entire build. Now the next thing I need to do is cut my board that will be the actual pediment. So this board is what my moldings in the pediment will attach to. They're going to be installed directly to this. So I determined the math. I'm not going to get into it, but I'm cutting this board to the correct length and width, ripping it on the table saw there, and then I'm finding center of this board. So once I find center of this board, I can then take a straight edge from that center line all the way to the other side, but coming down at an angle. And I know that that shape right there is the exact size pediment and angle that I need on my pediment. So I will go ahead and cut this out on the track saw. I'll get it set up actually. And then I'm letting my son Levi cut it out. It's actually really funny to see him holding this big TS75. That is just the size of him. It's pretty crazy. This is like the biggest track saw, like standard track saw on the market. So it's just kind of funny to see him holding it. So we have our pediment board here, and then we have these two offcuts. We ripped this down on the track saw earlier, and I got lucky and realized I could use these two offcuts right here as spacers. So I can put these in here. These don't have to be perfect, and I can get these installed. These are a little undersized, but it's not gonna matter, because essentially what I'm doing is I'm using these as a spacer, yes, but also as something to shoot my final piece into that's in my blocking that I have here. I know since I constructed this whole wall that I have substantial blocking all in this area specifically for this task. So what I can do now, I can go up and look. I just have to split the difference on where this is, and then I can install that right there. With my spacer in, I can now take my actual pediment piece and install it. Now this one, I do have to make sure that it's on all my indication marks. So I like it right there. Just checking this. That looks good to me. Now with this pediment board in, we can begin the molding installation process on it. And the first thing we're gonna do is find that single cut angle using the stare at miter finder. So I'll dial this in by keeping it flush on the bottom and then flushing it up with that angle. And if you look at the single cut indicator here, it's given me a reading of about 77 degrees, which is not something any miter saw can do without some kind of special jig. Now, thankfully, I have a special jig. It's called the Kaizen miter fence, and it comes with this extreme angle jig. I'm using the one in wood. There's an aluminum one that's adjustable as well that you could use, but I chose to use this one made out of wood because I'm screwing this molding to it from the back. So you can see here it's propped up in the position that it will be installed, and it would just be really hard for me to hold that in that position. Another thing I want to note here, this is a large cut going through this thick poplar. Poplar is a softwood, but it's just the angle that you want it to be precise. So I'm just taking my time, and you're seeing that cut in real time. It takes a while to get through that if you want a clean cut. So you can see me unscrewing it here, and that's where it was held up. But look at the angle of this cut. That is a sharp angle there. But using this process, I was able to get it to fit like a glove. You can see me drop it in here, locks in to our pediment board, and then sits flush on top. I left this a little bit long because I need to cut the peak miter on it up here, and I can determine that miter with the stare at miter finder looking at the miter cut indicator this time, and I came up at 12.5 degrees here. So I'll set up in position here against the fence, 12.5 degree miter, cut straight through it. And of course, I'm going to repeat this process for the other side. Same thing with my extreme angle cut and for the miter up top. So once I have both of these boards cut to size, I can then take them up and set them in place and just do a dry fit. And what you're not going to see here is I actually screwed these in from the back into that pediment board with trim head screws. So fits perfect, and then I already screwed them in by this point. Next, I'm going to install my soffit board, which my fascia will be nailed into. And these next two components, I had to use the extreme angle on them as well because they're all coming in at that same angle. I'm not going to show all of that because it's the exact same process. I screwed it to the extreme angle and did that same peak miter cut, and you can see the results I'm getting here where it meets the existing cornice. That is just too clean. So here comes the fascia, and for the fascia I have a cove milled into the bottom of it, so as long as that cove is lined up with the beginning of the soffit, you'll remember this from the mantel shelf top as well, I know that's exactly where I need to be. So I held that in position when I marked it off for these peak miters as well. So here I'm just gluing the joint and getting that shot in place and installed. And I'm like, at this point, I'm looking at this thing and I'm like, wow, dude, you might actually pull this off. So once again, we meet here at this corner, a little bit different situation, obviously, because now we have our pediment built up. So here's the real technical part of building a pediment that is extremely difficult to get right, but we've done it. So check it out. This piece right here, this is that same cove profile that we ripped off the bottom of the crown and wraps around the front. We talked about this at the beginning of the video. That continues to go. Remember, that's the bottom profile of that crown. I wanna highlight that fact, because here's what's gonna happen. That same angle right here, that 77-degree angle that all these have been, we're gonna cut that same cove profile to meet up with itself right here at this corner at 77 degrees. And you can see I've got this piece already cut. I cut it the same way using that Kaizen extreme angle jig, and you can see it matches up perfectly right there. So that is amazing how that works out. And the detail is really this corner, how this just dies into the same profile. This is true classical architectural detail right here. This is how it was designed, how it's meant to be, the proper way. So here's the next question. Okay, you've got that accomplished. What do you do with the top profile of the crown? This is only the bottom. How are you gonna get that crown to turn up? Well, the same way I ripped this off on the table saw, I'm gonna rip off that top profile of that crown molding, and this time I'm not gonna rip it the exact same way I ripped this one. I'm gonna rip it so that I have the majority of that top profile. So with this in position here, I've got a little sample glued up of that top profile of that crown rip off, and this will just sit right in here, guys. And I've got a little bit of a lip on top that I can lock that into. But that is how that's gonna go right there. And that is what we call a split fillet. So remember what I talked about. The crown is wrapping back into the wall this way, and then it's raking up the pediment. So I've taken this, put it in position, and I now have my peak miter cut on the end. So I have a little indication mark here as well where I want them to be, to meet up, just a little pencil line connecting them. So with it in position right there, I'm gonna come down on it with my little pin nailer here. Give it a few pins. And then you can see I've got some left over here. That's so I can push the crown up against it and automatically stops it. I didn't really think this through on this side, so I probably will add another strip there so that when I bring that top part of the crown profile, it'll just lock into place. But it's built into this one, meaning as I shoot this up, I need to keep it at that same reveal. Now when we come here, these two will kind of set themselves in place like that. But I'll put some glue. This split fillet detail right here has got to be top 5 most interesting carpentry task I've ever accomplished. To see that cornice pivot up on that point is really mind-blowing to me. So that is the bottom piece of that crown profile, like I keep saying, and I want to emphasize that again because we still have our top piece. Remember I showed this earlier, and the interesting thing about this, because we split this in two with this top piece and this bottom piece, I don't have any weird miter or any crazy cut here. This is literally just a 45-degree cut, but it's going to tilt up. So I'll measure from this back wall, get that cut, then I'll leave it long like I've been doing for all of these raking pieces. I'll put it in position here, and then I'll mark it off up there and put it in. Like, it's literally that easy. You're just taking a 45, it's pivoting on here and going up. That's it. We have our pre-assembled full piece here. Again, just a 45 that's gonna be tilting on our angle. So I'll get it in position, and you're good over there on my line?
Looks like it's right on.
There we go. I'm gonna leave yours loose a little bit because I want to match it up and glue it.
Looking good, man.
All right, guys, this has been a long journey, but it finally commences right here. I have completed my classical fireplace mantelpiece right here behind me. And the whole point of this really was, you know, I thought about going to Greece and, you know, doing all this stuff. And I was like, you know what? Why don't I save money on travel, save money on planes, all that, hotels, accommodations, and just bring Greece to my living room? Like, that makes so much more sense. Then I can enjoy it every day. We have an actual Greek temple front mantle with triglyphs, with a double cross-setted corner, with this cross-setted corner mantelpiece down here with the brackets, with this small wainscot pedestal, pencil molding. You know everything if you followed along. My highlight of this was literally what we just did in this video, and that was that split fillet on the raking cornice. The single hardest part about this was calculations. Where is stuff gonna fall? When you have this vision in your mind of what we see here, how are things gonna lay out? That was so crazy. I don't know how many like literal hours I just spent just like this, just like looking at it for each component. All right, if I put this here, how is that gonna line up here? And what's that gonna do as we make our way up? And you can see every single detail was accounted for. I mean, the size of the Samsung Frame TV fitting perfect in there. The sconces, the lights themselves are centered right with the TV. Everything, if you look at it, you'll find regulating lines up this whole thing. It was that was the most difficult. It wasn't really the carpentry, minus what we did today with that split fillet. That was pretty intense. The hard part for me was playing designer, architect on this build right here. Nobody handed me plans and said, here, build this. This all came out of my mind with inspiration from books, inspiration from just the images that I've seen, and it commenced all right here. So that was a long speech, but I really feel like this is the highlight of anything I've ever completed. So thank you so much for following along with it. I know some of you are probably like, good, we're ready to move on to the next thing. I am too, but I did have to complete this and finish it and put it out there. So yes, we'll be getting into some more videos, job site videos, some more stuff around the house. But again, thank you for watching and following along. This is the fireplace mantelpiece complete. See you next time.
I had a dream that you came to me, shining down through the clouds like a moonbeam.